In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the stock power and volume switches on your Arcade 1UP machine on your Raspberry Pi using GPIO. I'm going to give you some scripts and some step-by-step instructions on how to set it up. If all you want to do is set it up and you have the exact same scenario as I'm going to show you, then you don't need to know about too many of the details, but I am going to walk you through some of the code and what it's actually doing in case you have different volume switches than I have and you need to change it up a little bit. Hopefully I will give you enough information to allow you to do that. So let me try to clear up the confusion that some of you might have about how the power switch works with GPIO. GPIO is actually designed to just work with a toggle switch, so it doesn't even matter which way you have it plugged in. It just is expecting a signal to come on those pins, and it's going to tell the Pi to power itself on. The tricky part is getting it to shut down and shut down cleanly, because we don't want to just cut power, which is essentially what it would do if you didn't have a script. Or you might see some videos that say to take this switch out and turn it around. You actually don't want to do that. Just leave it in as is. The script that I'm going to show you works with it in as stock, and it's actually better because otherwise it's going to be trying to power itself back on over and over and shutting itself back down. It's actually better to leave it in this way. When the switch comes on, it'll from power off state, it's going to turn the Raspberry Pi on. The script will keep running in the background. It's going to keep checking the value of the switch. It's going to say, is it on? Is it on? Is it on? As long as it's on, it's going to stay on. Once it detects it's off, it's going to say, oh, I need to shut down now, and I'll do the shutdown script. And then it's just going to stay powered off until you flip it back on. Just sending a signal to those pins from the off state is enough to get the Pi to turn itself back on. So that's the way you want to use it. Just leave it in stock and connect it to pins 3 and 4. If you connect both the power and volume for GPIO, this is what it could end up looking like. These pins are what you have to use for power. This is GPIO 3 and ground, this black connection here, the third set of pins in. And then you have choices, but the ones that I'm using for volume are GPIO 18 ground and GPIO 23. And those are on the right side of the pins. If you're looking from the USB ports as being the bottom, it's the right side. So as you can see, I have some switches here, and I've plugged one of them into my GPIO pins. Now, this isn't actually a configuration that any of you would have out of the box, but I do have two kinds of switches here. I have one that is a generation 1 switch, which is 3 states. So it has all the way to the right, has a middle and a left, and it clicks in. So that's the old way of doing it, and you'll see a lot of the existing scripts were designed for that kind of switch. And if you have a Gen 1 device, that's the kind of switch you have. You can wire it up, but you can only set 3 levels of volume. You can't do anything else other than that through software because of that switch. The new generation of switch is more of a toggle switch. It just is in the middle. You push it to the end, and it snaps back to the middle. You push it down, it snaps back to the middle. The newer machines like the Ninja Turtles and on up use this kind of a switch for the volume switch. And in addition, some of the newer machines that have Wi-Fi like NBA Jam also use the same kind of switch for the power switch. You can see I just took the exact wiring that was already there and just plugged it straight into my GPIO pins. Now, you can do it this way, but that requires your Raspberry Pi is very close to your switches. I'm not sure how many people will be able to reach that. What you might have to do is cut these wires and solder in some additional length so you can reach the pins on your Raspberry Pi. It is handy to just use this existing 3-pin connector, so if you want to add length, I would recommend sticking length in the middle so that you can still use this connector and this end on the switch. So where do you stick this on GPIO? Well, you can put it multiple places, but I'll show you this diagram in a minute that shows you where I'm sticking it. So when you look at the diagram, pretend that the USB ports are on the bottom. So we're looking at it this direction, because here is the pinout diagram. So where I have this connected is going across pins 12, 14, and 16. So the middle pin is the ground, and one's going to 12 and one's going to 14, or as they're labeled for GPIO, 18 and 23. So you count from the end away from the USB ports down 3, that's where you put your power switch on GPIO 3 and ground, skip 2, and then I use the next 3 on the right side. So if your USB ports are on the bottom, you want to use, if you want to use the same pins I'm using, you use the ones on this side. Okay, so that's where I'm connecting it. Now, let's talk about the code. So if you've looked at these before, this might be the version of the code that you've seen, where it has the 3 button states, and you can see it has the mute, low, and high for those 3 states, and it just sets the A mixer PCM volume to either 0, 75, or 96. And if that's the kind of switch you have, that will work. But if I want to use the more recent version of the switch that's more of a toggle, this doesn't work because it doesn't stick like that. Instead, I've modified one that looks like this. And here you can see I just have 2 states because it's always going to snap back to that middle position. So you don't want to really have anything on that position because it's just going to hit it over and over again. So you only really need 2 states, a low and a high. So in this code, you can see there's some print statements so you can see what's going on. And it just increments the volume or decrements the volume and sets it. And then I set some limits on it. Actually, when you try this out, you're most likely going to find once you get below about 60% volume, you're not actually even going to hear anything. It's going to be very, very faint. Some versions of these scripts put in a mute functionality where if you hold it, it goes to mute. I didn't do that yet because it was just kind of confusing what's going on when it hits mute, because there's no visual indicator on the screen. What's happening is you just have to go by ear. And if you get stuck in mute and you don't know how to unmute it, it can be really confusing. So let me show you how this works. So here you can see I put in 2 values for my GPIO pins, 12 and 16. And why did I use 12 and 16? Well, if you look at this diagram, I was going across GPIO 18 to 23. They're actually pins 12 and 16. So using the GPIO library that this is using, that's how you identify it, by those numbers. So I'm using 12 and 16. So one of them is going to make it go high and one of them is going to make it go low. So let's see how this works. So if I run this script from a command line, which you can do if you SSH into your box, I'm not going to explain how that works now here because that's not the topic of this video. But if you've SSH'd into your Raspberry Pi, you have a command line. And from here, you can do sudo /dot and the name of your script. And oops, if you type sudo correctly, and then it runs it. So you can see it's running right now, and by default I set it to 75%. So if I'm using my switch here and I start moving it, and it's really this orientation, so this way is going to be high and this way is going to be low. So if I go up, up, I've gone up twice. And you look at the screen, you can see it first went from 75 to 80, then from 80 to 85. So if I push it back down, it'll say 80 again, push it down, 75 again, and so on. So the switch is working. Now, how does this really work on the Pi when you hear the volume? Well, if you are in a screen where you got video playing like this, once this video player kicks in, it's going to ignore the volume switch. You're not going to hear it change. So I'm turning it up, it's not getting any louder. But if I navigate away from that video and play another one, now it's louder. So there's a delay there. So if you were looking at the screen modifying that, or adjusting your volume switch, you're going to think, oh, it doesn't work because it's not actually doing anything. It does, it just only works when the video player kicks in. However, if you're using it for while a game's working, you can hear the difference. Now if I adjust it down, you can hear it's really going down. If I turn it back up, it's getting louder. So it works when a game is running. It just doesn't work very well in the emulation station interface. So now, it's really loud now. So let's turn that down. Down, 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 down. This is 75%, 70%, 65, 60, 55, 50%. Now it's pretty much mute, but you can still faintly hear it, but really you don't need to go much lower than that if you want to really turn it down. So yeah, it does work. It's just how it works is a little tricky. Like I said, in emulation station, you're not going to see it in your videos until you change videos, but it definitely does work during the game. And from that perspective, it's probably good enough for what most people need. All right, now I'll show you how to use the zip file to install GPIO scripts on your Pi. Now I've just finished flashing a card and I've downloaded the GPIO zip file. And now the next step you need to do is to just, and this is from the perspective of a Mac. If you have a PC, it's going to be slightly different, but what I'm going to do now is just remove and reinsert the flash card that I just flashed, and then I'm going to extract the zip file and drag the files into the boot folder of the SD card. Okay, I just reinserted my SD card and I now have a boot folder showing in my Finder. So I'll just open this folder. This is the only part of the Pi image that you can view from a non-Linux system. And now I'm just going to extract this zip file first because I can do it pretty easy here. So I'm just going to double click it, it's going to extract it, and then I'm just going to drag it over to the boot folder and copy it there. So now these files are on the boot folder. And now after this, we can go put the SD card in the Arcade 1UP and boot it up and then execute these scripts. All right, now once you've got a system that you either booted from the first time or maybe you've already been using, the next thing we need to do is just to make sure that we have an internet connection to download some dependencies for GPIO and to exit to the command line. Now, this particular image also has background music on, so if I turn the volume up, you'll hear that. It's kind of annoying. I prefer it to be off, and if you're trying to test your volume settings, it'd be better to just have that off anyway. So if you don't know how to do that here, you can go into background music. And just select disable background music, and exit. And when it's done with this music it's currently playing, it'll stop. Now let's go check on the Wi-Fi connection. So go down to Wi-Fi. Connect to a Wi-Fi network. And you'll want to select your Wi-Fi. If you didn't already have your keyboard connected, go ahead and connect it so you can into the USB port so you can type your Wi-Fi password. And then it'll connect. So now I got an IP address. Awesome. So now we can just exit out of here. And now we're ready to exit to the command line to run the scripts to set up GPIO. Just go ahead and hit the start button, and then in the main menu go to quit. And just make sure you just select quit emulation station, not shutdown system. This will take you out to the command line. So select that, yes. Now we're at the command line. As I mentioned, that music will continue to play until it reaches the end of the file, then it'll stop. All right, now I'm going to show you how to set up the GPIO power as well as the volume. So we're going to cd into /boot, cd into GPIO, and now we're going to run the GPIO-both. So I'm going to sudo /.gpio-both and go ahead and run it. It's going to check for updates. I just ran it recently, so there shouldn't be any updates necessary. But if you started with this script from scratch, it would install everything you need. And when it's done, it automatically reboots. So now both of these scripts should be active. Now you'll see that my switch was already in the on state when it's booting, which is what the script is going to expect the first time you boot. If you boot the first time with this already in the off switch, the Pi is going to start booting, the script will kick in, it's going to check the state of the switch, and if it's in off, it's going to say, oh, I should shut down, and it's going to shut back down. Or if you don't have your switch connected to GPIO yet, it'll do that same thing. It'll shut off when it boots. So if you get yourself into that situation, you can resolve it by either connecting the switch and having it in the on position so it won't shut itself back off, or you could use a regular button and plug it into the GPIO pins and just hold the button down when it's booting and until you can get out to a command line and disable the shutdown script that's running that's causing it to shut down, and then you'll be fine. You won't need this anymore and it'll stay on just like default. But now I have it installed and running. So now when I switch the switch to the off position, GPIO is going to kick in. The shutdown script is going to check the state of the button. It'll see that it's in the off position and it'll shut down the system. Actually, the script is running continuously. Even now it's running. It keeps checking the state of the button. It keeps saying, oh, still on, still on, still on. But once I switch it to off, it's going to do a controlled shutdown and prevent it from corrupting the card by running the real shutdown. And now I can just turn it back on by flipping the on switch back on. And there we go, we have a functional power switch.